In this module, we explore a few different leadership styles that have garnered a lot of attention over the past decade or so: authentic leadership, servant leadership, and transformational leadership. Before we delve into each style, I'd like to offer a few guiding thoughts that might help us process the information contained in this module. First, while it may be tempting, I suggest we try not to think about these styles as competitors. We are not trying to pick which style is the true style and which styles are imposters. Instead, I'd like you to think about what each approach to leadership has to offer and what you personally can extract from each style. I think you'll find overlap between the styles, and I think you'll find that no one style singularly accounts for leadership effectiveness. So rather than choosing one style, think about how to incorporate aspects of each into your repertoire. Second, there's an inherent fuzziness about the styles that makes learning about them difficult. If you did a quick internet search for each style, you'd find countless different definitions, underlying dimensions, and measurement tools. It may make sense to attempt to understand the reason for this, and then map out a plan for delineating the boundaries of each leadership style for the sake of this course and future leadership development beyond the course. If we trace back the roots of each style, we often hit on a single founding voice. In the case of transformational leadership, the movement stems from a book by James McGregor Burns written way back in 1978 called, quite creatively, Leadership. The book essentially compares different political and social leaders like Franklin Roosevelt, Gandhi, Napoleon Bonaparte, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, and offers a treatise on how leaders spark social transformations. He calls these leaders transforming leaders, and his ideas, which essentially involve how social groups form collective movements and create social change, eventually evolved beyond social and political leaders to also explain how organizational leaders get their employees on board, working towards a collectively shared vision. The genesis of authentic leadership can be traced to a book written by a former CEO and Harvard Business School scholar named Bill George back in 2003. His book, called Authentic Leadership, was written as a response to the rampant corporate malfeasance of the time, most notably the scandals at Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco that were fresh in everyone's minds. Bill George's thesis was that the key to fixing this ethical crisis wasn't new laws, but new leaders. And if leaders were more authentic, not only would trust in our social institutions increase, but so would shareholder value. In other words, it makes sense, not only moral sense, but financial sense, to be an authentic leader. In subsequent books and lecture series, Bill George went on to compare hundreds of different successful leaders and concluded that, while they all had different traits and engaged in different behaviors, there was a pattern of authenticity that explained a lot of their success. Finally, servant leadership was popularized by Robert Greenleaf in a book called Servant Leadership in 2002. Actually, most of the book was published in a series of essays he wrote in the 1970s, but it wasn't really until the 2002 republication that his ideas gained traction. In his book, he explores religious leaders, educational leaders, and even fictional leaders, and posits that the best leaders are servants first and attend to the needs of their followers. To oversimplify their reaction to these books, they raised a lot of thought-provoking questions and made a lot of money. As you can imagine, with these terms, transformational leadership, authentic leadership, and servant leadership, trending, consultants cashed in. There were countless books written, leadership development programs offered, and measurement surveys sold around each of these styles. Now, here's the problem. When a business fad captures the attention of consultants, there are incentives for every consultant to offer something unique. How can I get people to buy my authentic leadership tools and development programs if countless other consultants are selling the exact same thing? So what results is what we call construct proliferation, the idea of what is transformational leadership and what is authentic leadership spins out of control as everyone competes to offer their own unique definition. The result is the fuzziness I alluded to before. If I assign 10 of the most popular readings on, say, servant leadership, you'll get 10 different lists of what servant leaders do, most trying to one-up the other authors by broadening the scope of what falls under the umbrella of servant leadership. Aside from the confusion, another consequence of construct proliferation is that it makes validating claims difficult. How can we assess whether authentic leadership truly does work if it truly does increase employee performance and commitment, if we can't agree on a single definition or measure of what authentic leadership actually is. So generally, at the same time that there's a drive towards alternative conceptions of the leadership style, at least in the consulting world, there's also a drive towards construct definition and measurement consensus in the scientific community. The result of this tends to be the development of alternative universes. In one universe, there's this narrowly defined conception of the leadership style. There's agreement on what is and isn't critical to this style, and there's evidence about whether the style can be developed and how the style impacts organizational outcomes. While in the other universe, there's a lot of great discussions about the style, but also a lot of that fuzziness about how the style is defined and what is and isn't essential to the style itself. All of this to tell you that we'll cover both universes. I'll share some popular press resources about each style, which make compelling cases for the styles, but may not take a scientific viewpoint on the definition of what the leadership style is. And then I'll also share the academic models, which highlight general consensus about the underlying dimensions of the style and its antecedents and outcomes. One last issue I want to raise before we dive into the styles. The approach of this module is slightly different than the previous three modules. Here, I'll present a few required resources intended to raise your awareness of the topics, but then I'll offer as many supplemental resources as I can. If your interest is piqued and you have the time, I encourage you to work through these at your own pace, but don't become overwhelmed by the amount of supplemental resources. From a course evaluation standpoint, these are optional. Of course, if you have any related resources you would like to share, please feel free to send them my way. I'd be happy to add them to our list.